20 B-17 Flying Fortress heavy bombers of the American 8th Air Force take to the skies in heavy fog from RAF Framlingham. They are the first aircraft to take off from the 1st Air Task Force that will bomb the Bf-109 fighter factories in the Bavarian town of Regensburg. The 2nd and 3rd Task Forces will leave to hit the ball-bearing factories of Schweinfurt, deemed crucial to the German military vehicle production, later in the day. The mission has been delayed for fog, but due to a series of miscommunications over the delay, the bombers taking off from Framlingham have taken off 45 minutes early. At 7:15 am, the remainder of the Regensburg Task Force begin to depart from their bases across the east of England. Miraculously, no aircraft collide in the low-level fog, and the 146 B-17s from the 7 bomb groups begin their climb in their designated group assembly areas. It will take 3 hours for the bombers to climb to altitude and form up into 3 combat wings. It's the 17th of August 1943, and the efficacy of the daylight self-defending strategic bomber formation remains in dispute. Neither Britain nor the US currently have a frontline escort fighter with the range to fully escort a bomber force deep into Germany and back. The RAF and the 8th Air Force have been ordered to focus on destroying the Luftwaffe in preparation for the planned D-Day invasion in the following year. The combined British and American bomber forces are hitting the Third Reich around the clock, but sustaining heavy losses. The original plan was for the Schweinfurt and Regensburg task forces to make their attacks simultaneously, thereby saturating Luftwaffe fighter defences. The morning fog has increased the danger of collision when forming up large numbers of heavy aircraft. Ideally, Brigadier General Anderson, responsible for the raid, would have liked to have delayed both forces until the weather cleared, but this was not possible for the Regensburg force. The 8th Air Force are going to try something new. Instead of the Regensburg bombers turning back to England after hitting their target, they are going to continue on over the Alps to land in North Africa. A delay for weather would have meant the force running out of daylight to navigate to the Tunisian airfields. They have had to take the risk and go now. Consequently, the Luftwaffe fighters that attack the Regensburg force will now have time to land, reload and redeploy to hit the Schweinfurt force later. The forward high wing of the 3 combat wings is led by Colonel Curtis LeMay. LeMay would go on to become the US Air Force Chief of Staff during the Cuban Missile Crisis 19 years later. He isn't required to, but regularly volunteers to lead the most dangerous missions. During the form-up, 11 B-17s have had to turn back for various faults, with 4 airborne reserve aircraft replacing them. Just after crossing the Dutch coast, 24 P-47 Thunderbolt fighters rendezvous with the 139 Fortresses. They take up position 3,000 feet above and either side of the bombers. These fighters will only have fuel to stay for 20 minutes, after which they will be replaced by a second group of fighters for a further 20 minutes. Approximately 50 Luftwaffe Bf-109 and FW-190 fighters are waiting. The majority manoeuvre to position themselves high above the bombers and towards the sun. Another group of FW-190s approach from the north of the formation and dive in to make their attack. The P-47s engage, and a dogfight ensues. With the American fighters distracted, the 190s and 109s in the sun begin head-on attacks on the fortresses. Gunners on the bombers begin to call out fighters at the dreaded 12 o'clock high. The first fighters scream in and unleash 2-second bursts of cannon fire, aiming for the bomber's cockpit or engines. The first victim drops away from the formation and explodes. The remaining fighters in the sun hit the bombers in similar fashion. 2 109s are shot down by defensive gunners. After the set-piece head-on attack, the German fighters scatter and continue attacks in 1s and 2s. Each B-17 Flying Fortress defends itself with 9 mounted machine guns that provide overlapping fire primarily towards the rear. The front-on attacks are a clear weak point for gunner coverage, and so the initial attack is the most dangerous for the bombers. The second P-47 escort group has reached the end of its range and turned for home. The bombers are on their own now. Major McCullum, a P-47 pilot, speaks of their guilt at having to leave the bombers during longer raids into Germany. I don't think there is a fighter pilot in England in the business of escorting bombers who wouldn't be overjoyed to have the capability to escort the bombers to their targets and back. We learned not to like it, but to live with it. As the force approaches the flak heavy area around the Rhine, some heavily damaged B-17s have turned home, and 6 have been destroyed. There has been a brief lull. Only minor harassing attacks have been made by the Luftwaffe Bf-110s since crossing the German border. Unknown to the Americans, a new unit of Bf-109s has been formed under direct order of Goering, with the aim of intercepting high-flying and fast RAF Mosquitoes on photo recon operations over the Reich. Jagdgruppe 50 is dispatched at full strength with 26 109s. Orders also go out for every available pilot and aircraft in the area to scramble and attack in a poorly organised force of mixed aircraft types. As the onslaught resumes, a B-17 navigator later recalls, "Some of the 109s came so close that I could see the expression on the pilot's face. I still shudder when I recall the big black crosses on the wings. The only consolation was that the German pilots were just as in awe of us as we were of them. I couldn't help but think that they were as crazy as we, to fly into a formation that had about 250 caliber guns pointed at them." The heaviest casualties are sustained in the 100th Bomb Group in the lowest flying wing. Their losses throughout the war earned them the nickname the Bloody 100th. Eventually, after overflying the relieved cities of Mannheim, Darmstadt and Mainz, the Regensburg force finds itself alone. Nearly all fighters have expended their ammunition and returned to base with no replacement. 14 B-17s have been lost. After passing over the initial point of the bomb run into the target, the force reorganises into a column and descends to approximately 18,000 feet. Usually they would bomb from 28,000 feet, but Regensburg is deemed such an important target that the height reduction is worth the increased risk from flak. In the end, the flak isn't fierce, and the mighty bombers drop their high explosive and incendiary bomb loads. Visibility is high and the weather is good. They achieve a high level of accuracy, and they observe the 109 fighter factories of Regensburg being smashed to pieces. Civilian damage is low, and nearby hospitals are spared. The people of Regensburg are relieved by the accuracy of the strike. Colonel LeMay leads his force towards the Alps. A further 10 fortresses will crash land on the route to Tunisia from damage sustained from fighters and flak on the run-in. To the west, a force of RAF Typhoons, Mitchells and US B-26s attack Luftwaffe airfields along the Channel coast with Spitfire escort. They're attempting to draw German units into action that would have otherwise been used against the Schweinfurt force that's now assembling over eastern England. The raids prove a modest success, with minor units being drawn into action, and the turnaround of at least one major Luftwaffe unit being disrupted. The 222 fortresses of the Schweinfurt force have crossed the Dutch coast with an escort of 96 Spitfires. Believing that the early Regensburg force was going to return to England, the Luftwaffe has flown at short notice Gruppe from further afield across Germany. These new Gruppe will join the existing units who, due to the delay to the Schweinfurt force, have had time to land, refuel and rearm. The first engagement is a success for the RAF Spitfires, shooting down 4 109s. Polish flyers from 303 Squadron have further success, and in total 8 109s are shot down before the Spitfires hand over escort responsibility to the longer range P-47s now arriving. The replacement escorts have a less eventful time, with only minor skirmishes before they too turn for home near the town of Eupen. This time, the Luftwaffe have timed their assembly perfectly. The largest Luftwaffe force ever to attack an American bomber formation, 300 fighters, is waiting for the 222 bombers. The first set-piece head-on attack smashes into the bomber force seconds after the last P-47s leave. A ferocious and unprecedented air battle rages all the way to the target. One airman recounts seeing what looks like flares on the ground leading them to the target. They aren't flares, they're burning fortresses. Another notes that the number of airmen bailing out from the burning bombers makes the whole scene look like a parachute invasion. A co-pilot in one of the hard-hit leading groups says, "There wasn't much sense in calling out fighters. Everything was from 12 o'clock level for what seemed like eternity. Each time they came in, you thought that one of those times it would be our turn to get it." A German 109 pilot recalls, "When I first heard just how many planes they said were coming in, I went absolutely potty. I was scared." When they finally reached the bomb run into Schweinfurt, 24 B-17s and 18 German fighters have been lost. After the intense fight to this point, the groups are not as well organised as the Regensburg force was. The 3 ball-bearing factories of Schweinfurt are not concentrated in one area like the 109 shops in Regensburg. They're also located in residential areas. A new artificial ground smokescreen system is being deployed, and if unable to find their target, the groups are ordered to bomb the general centre of Schweinfurt. If the factories can't be hit, the factory workers are considered the next best thing. In relation to its size, Schweinfurt is considered the most flak-defended town in Western Europe. The bombers take a pounding on their way in and drop their 1,000-pound bombs. They make a left turn for the journey home to England. Bombing results in Schweinfurt are poor. Residential areas are hit, killing civilians. The bombs that do hit factories do little damage to the valuable machinery within. However, unbeknown to the Americans, they've destroyed a factory shop that's producing components for a secret new aircraft, the jet-powered Me-262. Ball-bearing production temporarily reduces by 38%, but enough reserve stocks exist for the effect on vehicle production to be minimal. The US bomber boys will have to return to Schweinfurt. The fortresses limp back towards home. They eventually meet back up with their P-47 escort on the German border. Further fortresses crash from battle damage sustained on the way in. The last notable engagements take place near Liège. Under escort, the survivors finally have an open route home. Throughout the day, the 8th Air Force has lost 60 aircraft, 16% of the force, with 102 young men killed. A further 60 to 100 bombers have been heavily damaged. B-17 gunners submit total claims of 288 German aircraft shot down. The reality is that they have destroyed just 21. Beyond the important morale boost of hitting the Third Reich back, it is debatable whether the bombing results of the 2 raids have justified the 60 aircraft lost. Regensburg's 109 output has been reduced by an estimated 8 weeks production. An unknown delay has been brought against the dangerous new Me-262 jet fighter that will terrorise the bomber forces a year later. The Schweinfurt raid has been disastrous in its lack of effect, and German ball-bearing production actually increases in the following month. The 8th Air Force will be forced to return to Schweinfurt 2 months later, where the concept of daylight strategic bombing will again be cast into doubt.